Let's create this creepy Crawly skull. I used a papier-mâché skull and painted it white. I did that so my decoupage paper would pop and that the natural papier-mâché color would not show through once I applied the decoupage medium. Here I'm trying to decide if I'm going to use varnish or decoupage glue, and I chose the Wise Owl Matte Varnish. I'm applying a generous layer of the varnish so that I can embed my decoupage rice paper into. Previously, I'd made sure that my design would fit, so I knew about where I needed to place it. I'm simply trying to smooth out the majority of the paper into the wet varnish. On a curved surface, it's very difficult to get everything completely flat. Here I'm beginning to cut the openings in the skull. This will actually give my paper a little bit of relief and reduce the tension on it so that I can lay it down flatter. Now I peeled back the paper so I can continue adding my decoupage medium in sections so it doesn't dry out before I'm ready to smooth everything out. You may have noticed that when I peeled it down, I actually peeled it down a little bit further so that I was exposing some of the already wet decoupage paper so that I could make sure that I did not miss a spot. And I did the same thing in this section, pulled the paper down just a little bit further. You will continue to smooth everything out as best you can, but here you'll notice that I have an overlap, and I'm simply going to cut out a dart basically, so that I can lay that down flatter. I don't mind that this means the design is not a perfect match. That doesn't bother me at all. If that's something that does bother you, you could always add a mold right here. I'm adding a little extra decoupage medium just to make sure it didn't dry out while I was doing the cutting. I don't know why, but I tend to miss my edges a lot, so I'm going back in just to make sure that I have those sealed in very well. Here I needed to add another dart. This one was much smaller than the other. I just like to make sure that my paper overlaps a little bit so there's no white space showing. I really don't mind the wrinkles, especially in a project like this, because it really adds to the grunge factor. Now I'm adding an additional coat of varnish over the top of everything to kind of sandwich in my decoupage medium. Cutting slits in the paper for the openings makes it easier to tuck the decoupage paper behind the skull. I'm cutting off some excess so that it's just easier to work with. You can decide whether you fold the paper over and decoupage it to the underside. It depends on what you plan to use this for. If the back side will show, you may want to sand off the edges like I did. Now it's time to choose a mold. I thought I was going to use the bee initially, but I changed my mind and decided that the Specimens mold from Orchid Designs was the perfect choice for this skull. I'm using the IOD Air Dry Clay, and I pulled off a portion of it. I kneaded it, and now I'm pushing it into the mold. I'm using a plastic stick to level off the clay. This doesn't always work well for me. Sometimes I tend to dig in too hard and I end up removing the clay, but I'm practicing my technique and I'm getting better. Now you push up from the bottom of the mold to slowly release it, flip it over, and then peel the mold back to reveal the casting. Now I'm going to play around with positioning of the beetle. This was actually my favorite position, but to be honest, it was a bit creepy and I figured it would creep my customers out as well. So I decided to have it going into the eye instead of coming out of the eye socket. I'm using Pentart acrylic paint in black and a soft bristled brush to paint in the beetle. Yes, you can paint your casting while it's still wet. In fact, it will help to reduce some of the cracking in the air dry clay, but you do need to use a soft bristled brush so that you don't lose any of your details. Using a palette knife to pick up your casting is very helpful so you don't squeeze it and mess it up. I am working on a piece of glass for easy cleanup. Now I'm just making sure that my edges are painted because those are the spots that you'll really see. I'm going to dry it first before flipping it over and painting the back. The only reason I'm painting a portion of the back is because you may see some of it if anyone picks it up. I'm using my favorite adhesive, Tight Bond Quick and Thick Wood Glue to adhere the casting to the skull. I'm doing a little touch-up painting where my fingers pulled off some of the paint from the wet clay and the paint had not had enough time to dry. I'm going to cast another beetle. You'll notice that I'm getting my clay out of a jar. That is actually some clay that had dried out and I reconstituted it. I have a video on that and I'll try to link it. So if your IOD Air Dry Clay has dried out, don't think it's a lost cause because it's not. The antenna on this one is quite delicate, so just be careful whenever you're releasing it. If you ever struggle with getting out the fine little details like this, you can pop the entire mold in the freezer for about 15 minutes and it will help. So now I'm just doing the same steps that I did before. I'm painting the casting and then I will glue it into place. Of course, you can add as many castings as you like. I thought 2 was enough for this, especially with such a busy background. Again, I did a little touch-up painting before flipping the whole thing over and painting the inside. I sped this up a whole lot because I'm sure you know how to paint. Now I'm going to start grunging it up a little. I'm using the Pentart acrylic paint, and I believe the color is earthy brown. I did water it down a little bit because I want it to be more of a wash, and I will use the water bottle to spritz before I put the paint and after, just so it becomes really more of a wash and not opaque, covering up my decoupage paper. I will continue doing this around the entire skull, and I will also do it at some of the openings like the eye sockets. And it's just intuitive. You decide when there's enough. I did use a rag just to kind of dry things off a little bit, and here I'm using the paintbrush and my finger to create a bit of splatter. I wanted to add a little darker edge, but this got to be a little too dark, so I tried to dab. That didn't work, so I added a little bit of water, and that got the paint moving. Now we'll add some gilding waxes to really bring out the details on those castings. I'm using the Pentart wax paste in gold, and I like to use my finger because it tends to give me more control. However, right here I do feel like I put too much wax on, so I'm going to use some clear wax in a bit to take some of the gold wax off, or to at least blend it in a bit better. Clear wax seems to work a little bit like a magic eraser when you're using it with other waxes. It's not taking it completely off, but it's definitely blending it in and softening it. The goal of using gilding waxes is really to hit the high points and bring out the details. Now I'm going to use some of the umber wax paste to grunge up a little bit more, and I'm going to use it as shadowing in lots of areas. I'm also going to add it to the castings. It takes down the brilliance of the gold just a little bit and makes it feel more aged. Finally, I'm going to rub it over some of the paper as well to bring out the texture that was created during the decoupage, and I'm going to do the same thing with a little bit more gold just to add some highlights. As I said before, you could always add more castings, you could add more gilding waxes in different colors. It's totally up to you. You make it your own. The papier-mâché skulls along with IOD molds are available in my booth at Flock of 5 in Sulphur, Louisiana. Or find your local Orchid Designs retailer by visiting the IOD website. The Pentart gilding waxes and paints are also available in my booth. Please like, share, follow, or subscribe if you found this video helpful. I'm Gingy with Louisiana Creations. Thanks for watching.